Elena Bishop was always the picture of poise and professionalism, a woman whose impressive career as vice president of a thriving tech firm was the envy of many. To her colleagues, her regular business trips were routine, scheduled for important meetings and product launches. But behind the polished veneer of boardroom presentations and impeccably tailored suits lay secrets that would soon upend not only her world, but that of everyone she held dear. For years, Elena had maintained an immaculate balance between her demanding professional life and her serene suburban home in Cedar Grove, where her husband, Richard, worked as an architect. Richard's days were consumed by blueprints and construction projects, and he prided himself on being the steadfast partner who supported Elena's ambitions. Yet, as the months passed, a subtle change began to emerge. Elena's trips, once brief and precise, were inexplicably stretching out, the return dates pushed back by days that were never accounted for in her official schedule. At first, the delays seemed like nothing more than an oddity, a postponed meeting here, a last-minute conference call there. But as the calendar pages turned, the pattern grew undeniable. Each departure, which should have lasted a couple of days, now extended into a longer sojourn, a carefully crafted alibi for something much more clandestine. Richard, initially inclined to trust his wife's explanations of unexpected work commitments, started to feel a persistent knot of unease tightening in his chest. There were whispers in the gaps of her stories, a stray receipt for a luxury hotel not mentioned in any itinerary, a hastily stashed scarf found on a rainy day when she should have been home, and the unaccountable silence during phone calls that once flowed with light-hearted banter. In truth, Elena's elongated journeys were no accident. Beyond the realm of corporate obligations lay an entirely different itinerary, a secret life pursued with a fervor that had long been hidden from the prying eyes of those who believed they knew her. The real purpose of these extended trips was to meet Adrian, a man whose charm and dangerous allure stood in stark contrast to the orderly life Elena led. Adrian was not just a fleeting distraction, he was the embodiment of everything Elena secretly craved. Their encounters, arranged in the discreet corners of luxurious hotels and dimly lit lounges far from Cedar Grove, were charged with a heady mix of desire and defiance. Every stolen moment with him was a rebellion, a conscious step away from the stifling expectations of fidelity and duty. Adrian's world was one of spontaneity and risk. He moved through life like a shadow, leaving behind a trail of whispered promises and enigmatic smiles. With him, Elena discovered the intoxicating thrill of a life lived on the edge, where every encounter was a plunge into the unknown. The longer duration of her business trips provided the perfect cover for these secret rendezvous. Each extra day was an opportunity to escape the mundane, to explore the uncharted territories of passion, and to immerse herself in a narrative that defied the conventions of her daily existence. Yet, this double life was a precarious balancing act, a dance along a razor's edge where one misstep could shatter everything she had built. Even as Elena reveled in the euphoria of her hidden escapades, the repercussions of her duplicity began to cast long shadows. Back in Cedar Grove, Richard's intuition was not so easily silenced. Subtle clues, an unaccounted-for expense here, a late-night phone call there, started to coalesce into a pattern that hinted at deception. In the quiet solitude of his workshop, amidst drafts and architectural plans, Richard found himself haunted by memories of a woman he thought he knew, a woman whose unexplained absences now seemed to carry the weight of secrets too burdensome to bear. Though he struggled to reconcile his love for her with the growing evidence of betrayal, the seeds of doubt had been sown. The tension in Elena's world was palpable. Each extended trip was more than a journey from one city to another, it was a deliberate venture into realms where business mingled with desire, and where every extra day promised both ecstasy and imminent peril. In a moment of rare introspection, Elena questioned the sustainability of the life she was leading. Could one truly maintain such a delicate equilibrium between the responsibilities of a long-standing marriage and the intoxicating call of forbidden passion? Or was she simply setting herself on a collision course with destiny, a course that would eventually force her to confront the cost of living two lives at once? As the wheels of fate turned inexorably onward, the stage was set for an unraveling drama. Elena's carefully constructed world, built on the fragile foundation of secrets and half-truths, teetered on the brink of exposure. The longer her trips stretched into uncharted territories, the greater the risk that the carefully hidden truth would burst forth, scattering the pieces of her life in a cascade of consequences that none could predict. Elena's heart pounded as she stepped into the grand hotel lobby of a city she scarcely remembered visiting. The polished marble floors and subdued lighting, which usually lent an air of quiet sophistication, now seemed to echo the secret turmoil simmering beneath her calm exterior. Each step she took was measured, as if every movement might somehow betray the life she was desperately trying to compartmentalize. Today, however, the thrill of illicit rendezvous was marred by an undercurrent of foreboding. Earlier that day, during a seemingly routine business luncheon, Elena couldn't shake off the prickling sensation that eyes were watching her. Across the polished table, a colleague's gaze lingered too long, laden with subtle questions masked as professional courtesy. The conversation, ostensibly about quarterly projections and strategic initiatives, was punctuated by pointed remarks about unexpected extensions of assignments and the challenges of time management. While Elena maintained a practiced smile, inwardly she braced herself against the rising tide of suspicion. That same afternoon, as she retreated to a quiet corner of her temporary suite, her phone vibrated with an unervingly terse message: "Watch." No signature, no explanation, just that one word that instantly transformed her private alarm into a cacophony of dread. In the cool, shadowed ambience of the hotel bar, Elena sought refuge among the soft hum of conversation and clinking glasses. She had planned to meet Adrian here, a meeting that, despite its inherent risks, had become an essential part of her escapist routine. Adrian arrived shortly after, exuding his usual magnetic charm, yet his eyes betrayed a rare glimmer of apprehension. As they slid into a secluded booth away from the prying eyes of other patrons, the air thickened with unspoken tension. Over the course of whispered conversation and shared confidences, Adrian recounted an odd incident. He'd been followed for several blocks by a nondescript black sedan that suddenly veered off at the last moment. His voice, usually steady and confident, wavered ever so slightly as he questioned whether it was mere coincidence or the prelude to something more sinister. The conversation left Elena rattled. She had grown accustomed to the thrilling risks of her clandestine meetings, but the idea of being watched, or even hunted, was an entirely different kind of terror. She tried to dismiss it as an isolated event, a misinterpretation fueled by her own paranoia. Yet, deep down, a small seed of doubt began to take root. The mysterious text message, the furtive glances during meetings, and Adrian's unsettling experience all coalesced into a portrait of vulnerability. Someone was closing in on her well-guarded secrets, and the implications were as chilling as they were unpredictable. Meanwhile, half a world away in Cedar Grove, Richard was wrestling with his own storm of emotions and suspicions. His once predictable days were now punctuated by subtle anomalies, a misplaced receipt, an unaccounted-for phone call late at night, and the haunting feeling of being left out of critical details of Elena's schedule. Richard had always trusted his wife implicitly, but as he began to piece together the fragments of her altered routines, an unbearable sense of betrayal gnawed at him. A trusted friend had even confided that there were whispers among their mutual acquaintances, hints of a life behind closed doors that Elena had meticulously hidden. Torn between love and the painful stirrings of doubt, Richard embarked on a quiet investigation, determined to uncover the truth that lay behind the veneer of their seemingly perfect marriage. As night deepened, the dual lives of Elena and Richard began to converge in unforeseen ways. Back at the hotel bar, Elena's instincts propelled her to retrace the day's events. With her phone still flashing that solitary, cryptic message, she scrutinized her call history and pondered every interaction. One fleeting glance during the luncheon, a brief encounter with a man whose eyes seemed to have memorized her every gesture, now loomed large in her memory. Was he merely an innocuous attendee, or had he noticed more than she intended? The thought sent a chill through her, as she realized that even the familiar spaces of her professional world were now fraught with peril. In a moment of desperate resolve, Elena decided she could no longer be a passive participant in this dangerous game. With trembling fingers and a racing mind, she resolved to confront the source of this intrusion head-on, even if it meant unraveling further layers of deception. The realization was as liberating as it was terrifying. Her carefully orchestrated life, built on a foundation of calculated lies and midnight rendezvous, was on the brink of exposure. The lines between loyalty and betrayal, trust and treachery, were blurring into a chaotic mosaic that threatened to consume her completely. As Elena left the bar, the cool night air offered no comfort. Every shadow seemed to hide a secret, every quiet street corner whispered of imminent danger. With each step towards an uncertain future, she felt the weight of the decisions she had made, and the ominous possibility that her world was about to change forever. The rain had started again as Elena stepped out of the hotel, its steady drumming against the pavement echoing the turmoil in her heart. The cool night air did little to soothe the fire of anxiety that had been ignited by the cryptic message, "Watch." Determined to find its origin, she resolved to retrace her steps from earlier in the evening in search for any overlooked clues. In the shimmering puddles and under the flickering streetlights, every shadow seemed to hide an observer. Back in Cedar Grove, Richard sat in his study, poring over receipts, bank statements, and the minutiae of Elena's recent travel logs. The once familiar patterns of their life together were suddenly riddled with inconsistencies. A hotel receipt from a city she never mentioned, a credit card swipe at an upscale restaurant on a night she was supposedly in a meeting, each anomaly stoked the embers of betrayal. With every new discovery, the loving, dependable wife he thought he knew was slowly transforming into a stranger. Unsure of whom to trust with her growing suspicions, Elena reached out to Simone, a longtime confidant from her early career days, a tech-savvy friend with a knack for unraveling digital mysteries. In a discreet downtown cafe, with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the low murmur of conversation, Simone began dissecting the digital footprint left behind by the ominous message. Her eyes, trained to spot the faintest digital irregularities, widened as she uncovered traces of manipulation in Elena's online activity. A series of seemingly benign posts and routine logins had been subtly altered, digital breadcrumbs that pointed to a single, unexpected name, Victor. Victor was a relic from Elena's past, a man whose presence had once stirred a potent blend of passion and reckless abandon. His memory was a bittersweet echo of a life once imagined but ultimately discarded in favor of stability. Yet now, his name surfaced in a context that chilled her to the bone. Simone explained that the data suggested Victor, or someone using his credentials, had been orchestrating a network of surveillance. It wasn't just a single warning. It was a part of a broader, more sinister plan aimed at unmasking Elena's double life. As Elena absorbed this revelation, she found herself pulled deeper into a labyrinth of deceit. She recalled her brief encounter earlier that evening, a momentary glimpse of a familiar face in the dim light of a side alley, a face that she had dismissed as a trick of the rain. Now, that memory transformed into a potential clue, a link to Victor, perhaps, or another player in this dangerous game. Not long after, as she navigated the slick streets, Elena encountered Adrian once more. He was leaning against the cold brick of a shuttered storefront, his posture tense and his eyes scanning the darkness as though expecting an ambush. The usual ease of their illicit meetings was replaced by a shared urgency. In a hushed conversation away from the prying eyes of the city, Adrian revealed that he, too, had experienced a similar intrusion, a message echoing the stark warning that had now become all too familiar. He recounted an encounter from his last trip, a clandestine meeting at a nondescript warehouse where influential figures, some with ties to Victor's old network, had gathered. The encounter left him shaken, convinced that Victor's ghost, or someone using his identity, was pulling strings behind the scenes. Elena's mind raced as she pieced together the disjointed clues. The realization dawned on her that her carefully orchestrated life of calculated deceit was now unraveling at the seams. Every extended business trip, every secret rendezvous, was part of a larger narrative she no longer fully controlled. With Victor's shadow looming over her present, the stakes had grown dangerously high. The thrill of forbidden passion was now tainted with fear, as if a predator lurked just beyond the periphery of her clandestine escapades. Simultaneously, Richard's quiet investigation reached a fevered pitch. He meticulously mapped out timelines and correlated Elena's supposed business obligations with the physical evidence of her travel. One credit card transaction led him to a luxurious hotel in a district he had never thought his wife would frequent. His hands trembled as he dialed the hotel, desperate for an explanation that could restore the trust he had once taken for granted. But every answer only deepened the mystery, fueling his determination to unearth the full extent of the deception. In the intertwining shadows of a city drenched by rain and secrets, Elena felt the suffocating pressure of her dual existence closing in on her. She was caught between the ghost of a past lover, Victor, whose name now resonated ominously through digital echoes, and the harsh reality of Richard's growing suspicions at home. The delicate balance she had maintained was teetering on the brink of collapse, and with each passing moment, the danger of exposure became more palpable. Standing at the crossroads of her tangled past and the uncertain present, Elena knew that the path ahead was fraught with peril. The hidden network orchestrating these warnings had a single aim: to force her hand and bring the truth to light, no matter how devastating the consequences. Every shadow, every flicker of doubt, was a harbinger of the reckoning that loomed large on her horizon, a reckoning that would forever change the course of her life. The dawn broke with a chill that seeped into Elena's bones as she navigated unfamiliar city streets, a far cry from the comforting suburbs of Cedar Grove. Still reeling from the revelations of the previous night, she clutched her phone as if it were a lifeline. Every notification, every buzz, now held the potential for both salvation and doom. It wasn't long before another cryptic message arrived: "Meet me where secrets sleep." The text was unsigned, its brevity cloaking an ominous urgency that made her pulse quicken. Torn between her instinct to run and the compulsion to uncover the truth, Elena decided to follow the directive. She arrived at an abandoned warehouse district on the outskirts of the city, a place where the echoes of past industry now whispered of decay and forgotten promises. The area was shrouded in early morning fog, and every step forward felt like a descent into a labyrinth of hidden dangers. As she cautiously moved through a narrow alley behind a derelict factory, a figure emerged from the shadows. A man in a tailored overcoat, his face partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, stepped forward with measured, deliberate strides. His eyes were intense and scrutinizing, as if he'd been expecting her. Without preamble, he introduced himself in a low, steady voice. "You must be Elena," he said, his tone both accusatory and oddly reassuring. "I'm Constantine. I work for someone who's very interested in what you've been up to." The words sent a jolt of apprehension through her. Constantine's presence was as enigmatic as the message that had summoned her. He motioned for her to step aside into the relative safety of a shadowed alcove. As they settled into a tense, whispered conversation, Constantine revealed the dark underbelly of the situation. "Your extended trips, your meetings with Adrian, they're only the surface of a much deeper game," he explained. "There's a network at work here, one that goes beyond office politics or illicit affairs. You've unwittingly become entangled in something that has its roots in your past, a connection to Victor." Elena's heart sank at the mention of Victor's name, the ghost of a past she had tried desperately to forget. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling between anger and fear. Constantine's gaze hardened. Victor was more than just a former flame. He was involved in covert operations, corporate espionage, political maneuvering, and clandestine dealings that blurred the lines between passion and betrayal. When you reconnected with him, or rather, when you became entangled with the remnants of his world, you stepped into dangerous territory. Someone has been monitoring your every move, manipulating your digital footprint, and using your personal weaknesses to further their own agenda. He paused, letting his words sink in. From his coat, Constantine produced a slim, black envelope. "Inside," he continued, "are documents and digital evidence linking your recent activities to a broader scheme. This isn't just about your extramarital affairs or your famed business trips. It's about leveraging your secrets to control you, to force you into decisions that serve a hidden purpose." Elena's hands shook as she accepted the envelope. The weight of it, both physical and symbolic, pressed down on her. "Why should I trust you?" she demanded, her eyes darting between Constantine's inscrutable expression and the shadowed contours of the warehouse. "Trust isn't something you choose to give lightly in times like these," he replied evenly. "But consider this, if you continue as you have been, your carefully maintained double life will collapse in a way that ruins everything, your career, your marriage, even your safety. Constantine's employer is not Victor himself, he's a man who has taken Victor's legacy and turned it into a weapon. He intends to expose every secret, every lie, to the world." The implications were staggering. Elena thought of Richard, of the trust they once shared, and of Adrian, whose allure had drawn her into this vortex of deception. She realized that her decisions were no longer solely her own. Someone was manipulating the narrative, and her every move was under surveillance. The weight of her double life, once a source of thrilling defiance, now loomed as a menacing threat. As she rifled through the envelope's contents, photographs, transaction logs, and cryptic emails, the evidence painted a damning picture. Constantine continued, his voice softening just enough to suggest a sliver of empathy amidst the calculated coldness. "You have a choice, Elena. You can either use this information to come clean and try to salvage what's left of your reputation, or you can remain in the shadows, letting someone else decide your fate. Every day that passes brings you closer to a reckoning you might not be ready for." For a long moment, the world narrowed to the sound of her own racing heartbeat and the quiet drip of rainwater from the dilapidated roof above. Elena felt caught between the urge to flee and the need to confront the monsters of her own making. The realization was brutal: the life she'd constructed, one built on calculated deceit and midnight escapades, was now a tinderbox waiting for a spark. With the envelope clutched tightly in her hand, Elena took a shaky breath and asked, "What do you want me to do?" Constantine's eyes glinted with a mix of challenge and compassion. "I'm not here to make your choices for you. I'm here to warn you. And if you decide to ignore this, be prepared to face the fallout when every secret you've guarded so carefully is laid bare for the world to see." As the first rays of a reluctant sun filtered through the fog, Elena stood at a crossroads. In that moment, the warehouse, with its silent testimony to forgotten histories, became a crucible for her future. The consequences of her actions were no longer confined to whispered conversations or furtive glances, they were tangible, imminent, and terrifyingly real. In the wake of Constantine's revelations, Elena felt a surge of conflicting emotions: fear, defiance, and a burning determination to reclaim control over her destiny. Back in a secluded hotel room with the city's relentless hum outside, she spread out the contents of the envelope on the small desk. Every piece of digital evidence, the meticulously logged transactions, the cryptic emails, and the grainy photographs, seemed to scream of a conspiracy that reached far beyond her personal indiscretions. They painted a picture of collusion, betrayal, and manipulation that implicated not just her clandestine rendezvous, but also shadowy figures deep within the corridors of power. The documents pointed to a nexus: a secret meeting held at a remote villa on the outskirts of the city, a location known only to a select few insiders. One particular email mentioned a rendezvous at this villa, a place draped in mystery and whispered about in elite circles as the haunt of powerful corporate magnates and political figures. With trepidation coiling in her stomach, Elena realized that this was her chance to confront the mastermind behind the manipulation and perhaps salvage a semblance of truth from the chaos. Before setting out on this perilous journey, she reached out to Adrian. In a hushed, midnight phone call, his voice, usually so smooth and assured, now trembled with uncertainty. He confided that he, too, had received subtle signals in recent days, a series of oblique messages and near-miss encounters that hinted at someone using the legacy of Victor's past connections to stage a far more dangerous game. Adrian's words were laced with anxiety as he admitted that he felt increasingly like a pawn in a labyrinthine plot whose rules were beyond his control. As Elena prepared to follow the digital breadcrumbs, miles away in Cedar Grove, Richard's own investigation was rapidly evolving into an obsession. Sifting through travel logs, financial records, and even personal messages, He discovered a recurring name embedded in transactions and coded communications, a name that sent a shiver down his spine because it hinted at connections within his own professional circle. The more he uncovered, the more it seemed that Elena's web of deceit was intertwined with forces far larger than their modest suburban life. Each new revelation fanned the flames of his suspicions and a growing resolve to uncover every hidden truth. Driven by a need for answers, Elena journeyed to the remote villa, a sprawling, secluded mansion nestled among ancient groves and shadowed by towering trees. The estate, cloaked in an eerie stillness, had an atmosphere of secrets long kept and whispered conspiracies. Approaching the villa, her pulse pounded as if warning her of the dangers that lay ahead. Every step on the gravel drive was a step deeper into a world where nothing was as it seemed. Inside the villa, dim corridors and the soft murmur of an old air-conditioning unit were the only sounds accompanying her. A narrow passage led her to a private study filled with relics of a bygone era, antique furniture, faded portraits, and shelves crammed with dusty tomes that had witnessed decades of clandestine gatherings. There, under the flickering light of a solitary lamp, she encountered a figure whose presence sent a shock of recognition through her, Victor. His eyes, hardened by years of secret operations, met hers with a mixture of sorrow and stern resolve. The specter of a past love, once a symbol of reckless abandon and passion, now stood before her as an unwilling guide through the perilous maze she had inadvertently entered. Victor's measured tone broke the silence. "Elena, you must understand, nothing is as it seems," he murmured. "The web that has ensnared you is larger than either of us. I never intended for you to become a pawn." Victor revealed that the sinister network orchestrating these events was not solely the remnant of his own former operations. Instead, it was being masterminded by an elusive figure known only as the Architect, a man who had skillfully exploited Victor's legacy to construct an empire of espionage, corporate subterfuge, and political manipulation. The envelope's contents were merely the tip of an iceberg that threatened not only her reputation and freedom but the stability of an entire system built on hidden power plays. As Victor unraveled the tangled threads of this conspiracy, Elena's mind raced to comprehend the enormity of the situation. Every extended business trip, every secret meeting with Adrian, had been manipulated as part of a far grander design. Before she could digest his words, the heavy sound of approaching footsteps broke through the charged silence. The ornate study door creaked open, and a group of masked figures silently stepped inside. Their presence confirmed Victor's warnings: the Architect's agents had arrived. In the ensuing chaos, Elena and Victor were forced to flee through a series of narrow, concealed passageways that snaked behind the walls of the mansion. With each step, the stakes of her actions crystallized. Elena's mind churned with questions: who were these operatives? Were they loyal agents of the Architect, or merely hired mercenaries dispatched to silence any dissent? And how did Richard's recent discoveries tie into this multifaceted scheme? As they raced through secret corridors lit only by the intermittent glow of emergency exit signs, the mansion itself seemed to conspire against them, its labyrinthine structure echoing the complexity of the deception that had ensnared her. Trapped between an imminent enemy and the shattering realization that her life was inextricably linked to a vast, malevolent network, Elena steeled herself for what lay ahead. Every fragment of the puzzle was aligning to form a picture far more terrifying than she could have ever imagined, a domino effect that threatened not only her own fate but that of everyone caught in the crossfire. In that harrowing moment, with echoes of masked footsteps and the distant sound of pursuit, Elena understood that the next move in this deadly game would determine everything. Her double life, the betrayals of the past, and the sinister force of the Architect were now locked in a collision course that promised no escape. The echo of hurried footsteps and the metallic clatter of a closing door reverberated down the hidden corridor as Elena and Victor darted into what appeared to be an underground control room. The space was an unsettling fusion of modern surveillance technology and archaic wiring, with banks of monitors displaying live feeds from locations that spanned not only the villa but also glimpses of Elena's past, her business trips, secret hotel lobbies, and even intimate moments she had believed were safely concealed. In that charged moment, the full scale of the conspiracy unfurled before her eyes. As Elena's pulse pounded in her ears, she absorbed the stark images on the screens, digital footprints of every clandestine meeting, every unexplained transaction, and even fragments of conversations exchanged in hushed tones. The evidence was irrefutable, a damning dossier meticulously assembled to dismantle her carefully constructed double life. And yet, amid the chaos of surveillance footage, one monitor revealed something even more staggering, a live feed of Richard, her steadfast husband, intently poring over a similar array of evidence in a dimly lit study back in Cedar Grove. The sight shook Elena to her core. How could the man she had trusted implicitly be so entwined in the same web of secrets? Questions raced through her mind, each more painful than the last. Had Richard been investigating her, or was he himself a reluctant participant in this labyrinthine plot? As these thoughts swirled, the heavy sound of footsteps and hushed voices from beyond the control room's reinforced door signaled that time was running out. Without warning, the door burst open to reveal a cadre of masked operatives. Their silent advance was methodical and precise, a stark contrast to the frenzied emotions that churned within Elena. For a moment, it seemed as if the entire intricate network of espionage, betrayal, and manipulation had converged into this single, volatile point in time. Before the agents could close in, the overhead lights flickered violently, and a deep, authoritative voice boomed from an intercom system installed high on the wall. "Stand down." The command rippled through the room, and a new contingent of federal agents stormed in, their badges glinting in the sporadic light. In a surreal twist, it was revealed that Constantine, the enigmatic messenger who had warned Elena, was not merely a pawn but an undercover operative working for an international task force dedicated to dismantling the criminal network once and for all. In the ensuing chaos, allegiances and motives unraveled with breathtaking speed. One of the masked figures, whose eyes held a chilling emptiness behind the mask, was unceremoniously cuffed by the federal team. In a low, measured tone, he murmured a single word, "Architect." The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. The architect, the phantom mastermind whose reach had extended into every facet of her life, had been pulling the strings all along. And the evidence suggested that his machinations were far more complex than a simple vendetta against her. His network had infiltrated corporations, government agencies, and even the personal lives of those he sought to control. In that critical moment of confrontation, Elena found herself at the eye of a storm. With her heart in turmoil, she turned to Victor, whose solemn expression betrayed decades of regret and hard-won wisdom. "Elena, listen to me," he urged quietly, "you were never the target. You were the catalyst." His words resonated with a truth that she had long resisted. Every extended business trip, every furtive rendezvous with Adrian in dimly lit corners of distant cities, it was all part of a grand design, engineered to expose the rot festering within powerful institutions. Even Richard's own investigation, which she had feared would shatter their bond, was not entirely antagonistic. It had roots in his determination to protect their family from forces far more dangerous than personal betrayal. As the federal agents methodically secured the room, Elena's eyes darted to a secondary monitor. There, in an almost cinematic twist, she saw Richard in his study. His face was etched with conflict, betrayal and sorrow mingling with a steely resolve. In that raw, unguarded moment, he whispered into the phone, "I never wanted it to go this far." The confession, caught on film and now broadcast inadvertently over the security system, laid bare a truth more complex than simple infidelity. Richard, too, had been ensnared in the net of the architect, a man whose influence had reached deep into the lives of both lovers and spouses alike. Caught in the crossfire of personal anguish and a battle against shadowy forces, Elena made a choice. With trembling fingers, she retrieved the digital evidence from the control panel and, in a desperate bid for redemption and freedom, initiated a live broadcast. The monitors around the control room flickered, and soon, the entire network of surveillance, from the darkest corners of the villa to the unsuspecting quiet of Cedar Grove, was streaming the truth to the world. In that electrifying moment, the hidden machinations of power, greed, and betrayal were exposed for all to see. The architect's network began to crumble as regulatory agencies, law enforcement, and international watchdogs converged on the scene. Constantine allowed himself a brief, rueful smile as he watched decades of clandestine operations collapse into chaos. Victor faded into the shadows, his role as both mentor and cautionary tale complete. And Adrian, whose allure had once promised forbidden liberation, stood silently at the periphery, his true allegiance as enigmatic as ever. As the broadcast continued and the damning evidence streamed live across countless screens, Elena felt the weight of her choices, the sting of lost trust, and the bittersweet taste of an uncertain freedom. Her double life, once a seductive dance between desire and deceit, had become the spark that ignited the downfall of a vast, corrupt empire. In the ruins of shattered secrets and broken alliances, she stood alone at the precipice of a new beginning. Every whispered lie, every extended trip, every secret meeting had led to this moment of reckoning, a moment where the darkness of the past was laid bare, and the promise of an uncharted future beckoned with both hope and trepidation. In the quiet aftermath, as dawn crept over a city forever altered by truth, Elena realized that the cost of living in shadows was steep indeed. The scars of betrayal would linger, a reminder that some secrets, once exposed, can never be reburied. Yet, in that final, transformative moment, she found within herself the resolve to step forward into the light, no longer as a woman defined by her deceptions, but as a force determined to reclaim her destiny.